So I will be teaching the lesson, the guided project for everybody today. And today we're going to be covering responsive CSS. So building on all the concepts that we learned about last week, HTML and CSS, we're going to take it to that next level, that next step, and learn a little bit more about responsive CSS. So what is responsive CSS? Let's talk about it. I think we should all be kind of familiar with the idea of responsive design, right? This idea that we have to design for a different variety of browser sizes. And that's sort of the particular challenge that we face as digital designers, right? Being able to support the variety of devices. And so to best support those devices, we need to ensure that our designs are flexible and responsive so they work in each of these various contexts. And so previously, right, we have this approach of starting with mobile first, right, the smallest possible screen, and then working our way up to the largest screen. And in our design tools, we'd have a different artboard or frame for each screen that we designed, right? We'd have the mobile one, and then we might have an iPad one in the middle if we need one, and then we'd probably have sort of a desktop size one, so maybe around like 600 pixels wide, and then up to like 1,000 or maybe even 1,400 pixels, depending upon how large your desktop is. And while this is a helpful start, we can't really see how this design looks outside of the structure of the artboards, right? It's not flexible. It's kind of like screenshotted into each of those designs. So we don't have this sort of flexibility baked into a lot of our design tools. I know Figma is actually working on this, making this even better for us. And I think Sketch is a little bit as well. But right now, the way our current design tools are working, we're really kind of designing artboard to artboard. So we use our designs as a starting point, and then we create the rest of our responsive design in code, right? And make sure they can flex and grow organically across all these different viewpoints. So right now, up to this point, we've learned how to code static interfaces that don't behave responsively. And what we need to learn in order to make our interfaces responsive with CSS are three new concepts. We're going to learn two of them today, and we're going to learn the other one tomorrow. So the two that we're going to learn today are the viewport meta tag and media queries. And then tomorrow, we're going to learn about responsive units, right? So we've been using pixels so far, and we'll learn about percentages and ems and all the important responsive units tomorrow. But today, we're focusing on the meta tag and media queries. And these three techniques and technologies are going to enable us to design responsively and make sure that our design is flexing across all these various contexts. So let's take a look at our viewport meta tag here. Maybe I'll start sharing my screen here so we can see things in a little bit more detail in the code. So bring this over here, and I'll bring this over here as well. Make sure Zoom is out of the way. And let's open up our Visual Studio Code here and take a look at what we're working with. So we've got our main.css here, and this I've tried to make this as accurate as possible to y'all's CSS because I wasn't following along, so I was watching the videos, making sure this was accurate. If there's something here that doesn't look like what y'all have done with Christian, let me know. But I'm hoping this is as accurate as I can make it. And this is the HTML we've been working from. So this looks hopefully pretty similar to what y'all have in your own work. And remember, this is definitely a good fingers on keyboards kind of day, so keep practicing, keep coming along, and we'll work on this together. So what do we have so far, right? We've got our head section, and this is where we're going to put our viewport meta tag. And up to this point, we've kind of done a little bit with the head, right? We've got our Google font link in there, we've got our style sheet link in there, right? But we haven't added a ton more information here. And so with responsive design, we're going to add a new tag to our head, and that is the viewport meta tag. So what is a viewport meta tag? Let's talk about it. So it's actually a type of meta tag. So that's the element that we're actually going to be adding to our HTML. And meta tags provide metadata about the HTML page that they're incorporated into. And metadata, if you're not familiar with that term, it's just information about information or data about data, right? It's kind of describing the information that exists on this page or describing any information that exists. So this metadata is not going to be displayed in the UI or on the browser. Instead, it is machine parsable, and it's giving instructions to our browser and to other machines that would be interpreting the page, right? And so we have a whole bunch of meta tags out there that we can take a look at. If we go over to our friend, the W3 schools, right? And let me share this in the channel with everybody so y'all can see it. They have a whole bunch of meta tags, right? We can describe, you can give a description for the page. What is this website about? We can add keywords here, so that way a search engine or a browser might be able to say, oh, this is like what this page is kind of the information they're presenting. We can give it an author if this is like a blog post and we want to specify one person. And then finally, we have this viewport tag right here. And what that is doing for us is it's saying what how the browser should be interpreting the page on different devices and in different device contexts here. So that's a little confusing. Let's break it down and look at a few examples here. So let me open up our employee mockup here, or sorry, our code that we've been working on. And this should be kind of pretty much everything so far. We've got our navigation, we've got the cards in here, and we've got the footer down here. We've got to clean up a few things today, but don't worry, we'll get there. So if we go ahead and we open this up in DevTools, right? So we're going to right click on the page here and hit inspect. And I want to make sure I bring this on the right page here. We're just going to open this up, our DevTools panel, and we're going to push a button that we probably haven't looked at yet. And that is the mobile preview button. So if you look up here in your upper left-hand corner of your DevTools, you're going to see this little like iPhone and then maybe like an iPad or a tablet here. And what this does is it actually allows us to emulate a mobile environment on our devices here. And this is really useful for responsive design because we want to see how it looks on an iPhone or on a Samsung or on an Android. So we need to make sure the screen is realistically pretending to be that type of device here. So this is a really powerful tool that we're going to use to see what it would look like on a smaller screen. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to click this button here. And if I make this a little smaller now, what we can see is we've kind of shrunk the page down. And if we see up here, there's this tab up here that says responsive, and we can actually click on that and select the different devices we want to be emulating or pretending to be over here. So this is really powerful, right? We can pretend to be a Pixel 2 or an iPhone and see what it actually looks like in that context. So I'm going to pick like an iPhone 6 here, for instance. And if we give this page a refresh, notice how everything is just kind of like shrunken down. It's just like a smaller version of the desktop, right? And without the viewport meta tag, this is how a page behaves, right? It just tries to shrink down the experience. And that's not super great, right? You actually want it to be much larger so that way you can read it, right? Could you imagine like actually opening this up on your iPhone or your smartphone? It would be tiny, right? You'd be having to like move the page all around and kind of zoom in, if it even lets you zoom in, right? So this is not an ideal experience. We actually have to tell the browser to say, hey, don't just try to shrink the page down. You're going to want to use the device setting and the device width to resize all the elements on the page. And that is what the viewport meta tag does. Those are the instructions we're giving the browser with the viewport meta tag. So any questions so far on what the viewport meta tag is or why we want to use it? It's all making sense, resonating with everybody? Seems to nods. Okay, so let's go ahead and add it. We'll break down what the tag is doing, and then we will see what it does to our interface over here once we add it. So let me pull up VS Code again. Alrighty, make this a little larger so we can see. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add a meta tag. So a meta tag or a meta element is the first piece that we're going to need here, right? So let me add a little space here so we can see it on its own. So like any HTML tag, we're going to go ahead and start with our angle bracket, and we'll write out meta. Oh, not me, but meta. There we go. Awesome. And this is a self-closing tag here, right? So it doesn't need another tag at the end. It doesn't need a closing tag because we're going to be using our HTML attributes to provide all of the information this needs. Okay, so we've got our meta tag here. Now we're going to need to give it a name. So the name attribute specifies what type of meta tag it is. So in this case, we want it to be the viewport. But remember the couple that we looked at, the description, the author, the keywords? We can have different types of meta tags. And the name is what specifies which one it should be. So we'll do a name attribute here. We'll say name equal. And this is good fingers on keyboards here. This is good practice. You won't learn this by watching it. You got to follow along and type along. So make sure you are typing and following along as we go through all of this. All right, so we've got our name. And now we're going to go ahead and put viewport in here. So we'll say viewport, right? To say this is the meta tag that we're using, so the viewport tag. And now we're ready to give the browser the instructions it needs to resize our content appropriately on smaller screen sizes. So we're going to give it another attribute, and this is called the content attribute. And what it's doing, it's defining the instructions that we're giving to the browser here. So let's go ahead and we'll write that. So we'll say content equals, and then we'll do our quotation marks. It's the same format, every other HTML attribute we've used, the href, the rel, the other href, ID, class, right? That same syntax, so nothing new there. We're still using our knowledge. And now we're going to put something unique and new into here. So we're going to say, I'm going to type it out, and then we're going to unpack what it means here. So we'll say width is equal to device width. And then we'll do a comma, and we'll say initial scale is equal to 1.0. Alrighty, and we'll give this a save here. So what does this mean? What instructions are we giving the browser here? So it comes in two parts, right? This comma is kind of saying, okay, we've got something going on with the width, and then we have something going on with the scale as well here. So let's break it down. So we have width is equal to device width. What this is saying to the browser is that the width of the viewport, or the viewable information on the page, should be set to the width of the actual element or the actual device that we are looking at the browser in, right? So that could be a little confusing here, but if we come back to our design here, right? This is saying that the width of the experience that we're looking at should just get shrunken down, right? Should be compressed into the size of the device. Instead, what we're saying is the opposite, right? We want to stretch it so that way the width of the page is equal to the width of the device itself, right? We're kind of giving it those explicit instructions so it knows to stretch it out and make it equal to the width of the page as well. So any questions on width is equal to device width there? Does that make sense for everyone? Let me go check Slido here, see if any questions are coming in. Any questions on that one? All righty, let's keep rolling then. So then we have the second part to unpack, right? So if I go back to VS Code, we've got initial scale is equal to 1.0. So what this is saying basically is it's kind of like a reset across the board. Different browsers, different devices have different default zoom settings. And so we want to make sure we have the same zoom settings across the board. So that way it's not blown up super large or shrunken down super large. And it also is saying that we want the user to have control over the zoom as well. So we're not fixing the zoom. If they need to pinch in and see something a little bit bigger on a mobile device, they can do that. They have the ability to control their own zoom. And if they want to zoom out, they can do the same thing, right? So what this is doing, it's just kind of saying we're going to initialize the scale or the zoom to 1, so that way it's like 100% across the board, and then the user can have full control from there. So it's a little less like instructions for the like the width of the device, like this other one is doing for us, and it's more of just like a reset across the board. So that way we have the same consistent experience across all different browsers and different devices there. Okay, so now that we've done this, we've added this in, we've given that page a save. Let's go ahead and give this page a refresh and see what happens. Everybody see the big difference there? We went from a zoomed in version of the desktop, and now we're treating the experience like the width of the device itself, and things are flexing down here, right? And the zoom is set to 100%. We're not super zoomed in or zoomed out anymore. So this is the power of the viewport meta tag, right? It kind of is the foundation we need for the browser to treat our CSS appropriately for this mobile context, right? So everybody see the importance of the viewport meta tag there for us in our responsive design. It's kind of the foundation. We're going to say, okay, treat the browser appropriately for the device context, right? And this is an iPhone 6, for instance. That's what we're emulating. It works on Galaxies, it works for Pixels, it works for iPads, and it also works for desktops, right? We're still interpreting this information on Safari and on Chrome and on Firefox, on Macs, on PCs or Linux, whatever you're using. These are the important instructions it needs to make sure it's a consistent experience across the board and across devices. Alrighty, so now that we've seen this in action, what questions do we have about the viewport tag, the viewport meta tag here? I'm gonna check out Slido here.
Yeah, so that like code that you put in for the meta tag with the instructions, is that kind of like the default instructions you're always going to give when you want responsive design, or do you have like more specific instructions depending on the content that you're organizing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that is the default. That is the one we're going to start with across the board. You can give more specific instructions if you need it, but in 99.99% of cases, you can get away with the default. So I've been a software engineer for like 5 years. I don't think I've ever had to tweak the viewport tag, right? It just wasn't something we had to do. I'm thinking there might have been one very esoteric use case where we actually had to do it, and it involved like print screens and like printers and something crazy, but that's the only time that's coming to mind. So you really can get away with just this default for a lot of your work. Awesome, great question. Any other questions?
Because the whole thing has to be without spaces. Like, for example, if I wanted to read it a little bit easier, can I have a space after the is equal to device width? and then a space after comma.
Mm-hmm. So I believe you can have a space here for sure. So you can have one there if you want, but I think these have to be no space because these are like the actual literal instructions. It's kind of like a class name, right? You need to have hyphens between it. You can't have spaces. Otherwise, that's two separate class names. It's kind of that same concept there. So I've always seen these together, but I've seen commas here or spaces next to the comma there. Does that help clarify?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Great. Good. Another good question. What other ones do we have?
I have a quick question.
Mhm.
Does it matter where we put the meta tag?
It does matter. We need to put it inside of the head, right? Because it's meta information that's showing up in the actual experience. Within the head, we don't have to follow any convention, right? We can put it anywhere inside of there. But generally speaking, the way we structure our head is we have the title up top towards the front. Then we do all of our meta tags or all the descriptions about the page. And then we put our links and external resources below that. So that's the general structure. But you do need to put it inside of the head, but you don't technically have to follow that convention if you don't want to. Does that help clarify a bit?
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. I've got some great questions this morning. Any other ones? Feeling good? Seeing some nods already then. So if we're feeling good, we're feeling confident here. Who can explain to me what is a meta tag? What does it do when we add it to the page here? And I'm talking about the meta tag element in particular, not the viewport yet. We'll get into that, but what does a meta tag do when we add it to the page?
It's like information of information, and it's not visible on your any of your screen devices or stuff like that.
Absolutely. So that is exactly what is going on here. So it's information about the page, right? And we're writing it here to give information in different contexts, right? To our browsers for like SEO purposes. If you're looking at like Google search results, for instance, and it says like the title of the page, and then it has like that little like 2-sentence description, that is populated from that page's meta tag, right? From its description meta tag. So this is the information about the page. It's not showing up in the actual user interface, the experience, but it is showing up in other places as machines read it and parse it. So that's exactly what's going on there. So what about the viewport meta tag? What is that doing for us in particular? Who's got an idea?
With that, basically the name of the instruction that you wanted to produce. So
Mhm.
all this instruction will be on whatever screen or viewport you're watching, and it will follow those instructions, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you're providing instructions to the browser with the viewport meta tag, so that way it can resize and scale the page appropriately for the experience you're designing. That's exactly what's going on there. Awesome, great. So we've got our heads wrapped around the viewport meta tag. So whenever we're doing responsive design, and in fact, these days, whenever we're building an HTML page, we're going to include the viewport meta tag in here. So we looked at how to add this to our just like regular VS Code, but let's look at how we would add this in to CodePen here, just so we can see the difference, right? So if we come over to our CodePen, right? And we've seen this before, right? Inside of here, we've got our HTML, and that's really just everything that's happening inside of the body tag, right? So how do we add information to the head? We don't have access to it right here inside the default CodePen interface. So what we need to do is go over to the settings button up here. If you click on settings, we've got a couple of different menu items up here. We've got HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and we don't have to worry about JavaScript or behavior, but we will be learning a lot more about HTML and CSS. So if we click on the HTML button, we can see that we can put stuff in the head right in this text box, and then it will appear in the head of the page here. And they even have this button here to insert the most common viewport meta tag. Because this is so common, it's something that all developers are doing when they're starting their work, they've just added a button here, so we don't even have to go look for this or copy and paste it or remember it. So anytime we want to add the viewport meta tag to our CodePen here, we go to settings, we go to the HTML tab, and then we just click this button here, and look what it added for us. This meta tag with the name of viewport, content equals width is width equal device width, and then initial scale is set to 1 as well. And you can do 1, you could do 1.0. 1 is not more correct than the other, it's just your preference. And this is perfect, right? We've got this head, this information here. And now if we give this a save and close, we are ready to go. We're ready to start doing our responsive design. So it's a little bit of a different process, but that is how it's working over in CodePen. All righty, great. So now we are ready to start looking at sort of the meat and potatoes of our responsive design, and that is the media query here. So let me go back to this and let's talk a little bit more about media queries. So we need to have a way to figure out when the page gets to a certain size, we want to change the design. We want to change the CSS and change the overall experience here. If I open up like Airbnb.com, for instance, and we come over and check out their interface, on this desktop view, right, it's pretty large, right? There's the menu over here. We've got some navigation items. We've got like this nice hero image. If I make the page smaller, right, if I shrink the page, the first thing we'll notice is this navigation disappears, right? It goes away. And if I make the page even smaller, we have a totally different user experience here, right? A totally different UI. And what they're doing is they're saying, okay, when the page is at a certain size, we want to change the design. We want to change the CSS to provide a different design. So how are they doing that? How are they changing and saying, you know what, here's where we're going to make some adjustments? Well, they're doing that with a media query. So media queries encapsulate parts of our CSS and only execute it if a certain condition is true. And these conditions might include, is this screen larger than 1,000 pixels? If it is, we want to do this CSS to support this new design. Is it less than 500 pixels tall? No problem. We're going to change the design here and tweak things a little bit differently. And you can even do some really powerful things where if you want to do like a print preview, for instance, and customize that experience to make sure it's a really nicely designed thing for your users, you can use media queries to target those environments as well. So what we're going to be using media queries for is our responsive design. We're going to use it to say, has the page reached a certain width, a certain size? And when it does, we're going to add CSS to the page to change the existing styles here. So if you think about this, back to like Figma or back to Sketch here, we've got our mobile artboard and we've got our desktop one. And so this is how in our code, we make the switch from that mobile design up to our desktop design here. So that's how we're making the switch back and forth between the two. So any questions so far conceptually on media queries? Does that make sense for everybody? Seeing some nods. It definitely helps to see them in practice. So let's go and take a look here. And let me go and look. We'll look at them sort of in isolation over here in CodePen, and then we'll start bringing them over to Employ once we've got our heads wrapped around the syntax a little bit more. So let me share the screen with everybody, or share this CodePen. So that way you all can open it up, follow along. So when I save things over here, they should show up on your screen, or they should when you refresh. So that way you can kind of follow along and see what's happening here. Alrighty, so the first thing, let's just add like an H1 to the page here. So a header one, so that way we can kind of start targeting something. So we'll say H1, and we'll say hello UX7, and we'll close it up like that already. Oh, gotta get the right element closing tag there. Okay, perfect. We give that a save. We've got our H1 here. So now let's think about like what we could do with our responsive CSS. So already, right, if you want to kind of control the width of a CodePen, all you have to do is kind of hover over this like lighter gray section here, and you can control the viewport size of your screen here. So this is really nice for really quick prototyping. So what if we wanted to say like, all right, and actually if you notice down here, you can actually see the width of the viewport when you scroll in here. So this is, again, really useful, really nice if you want to see like, okay, at 500 pixels, we're going to make some changes, right? And let's go about doing that here. So what we want to do here is we want to say at 500 pixels, we're going to make the text color of this H1 red, for instance, right? So on smaller screens, it's going to be black. And then at 500 pixels and above, we're going to switch it and make it red here. So how would we do that, right? Well, we know how to make the text color red, right? That should be old news for us at this point. So what we would do for that is we'd say H1, right? We'll use an element selector here, and we'll do our curly brackets, and we'll say color, and we'll just set it to red really fast here, right? All right, so this is like a step in the right direction. We've gotten the color red, but it's red all the time, right? It's red on small screens, it's red on these larger screens, and that's not quite what we're going for, right? We want to make sure it's black on the smaller screens, but then red above 500 pixels. And this is where the media query comes in. This is what's going to enable us to make that switch when we want to. So let's write it out here, and then we'll unpack all of the different pieces. So we'll go ahead and we'll say @ so we're going to do the @ sign here. and then we'll say media. Ooh, spell that right. And then, so that's like how we initialize the media query. We let CSS know, okay, this is the beginning of it. Then we put some some parentheses there. And what that means is inside of here is where we're going to define the conditional, or we're going to define the thing that says at this spot, at this width in our browser window, we want it to make the change, right? So this is where we define where the change should be happening. And we'll go ahead and we'll say min width for now, and we'll unpack that in a second here. Let's say 500 pixels, right? We're targeting 500 pixels. And then we do some curly brackets. Inside of those curly brackets is where we're going to write the CSS that we want to have happen once it reaches this size or this conditional, right? And this is a media query. This is it. It's not more complicated than this. So we start with our at media, we put our conditional inside of the parentheses, and then we have our curly brackets, and inside of there is where we define all the CSS that we want. So up to this point, right, it was kind of, before we had this H1 here, it was black by default, right? That's the default text style. And once we have our H1 on the page, and then we have our H1 selector with our color red, it's red all over the place, right? So what we want to do is kind of have it be black, and then once it goes beyond 500 pixels, then we'll have it go to red. So what we're going to do, instead of it being all over the place, we're going to move this inside of our media query. So I'll hit Command X here and Command V just to paste it. We'll do some tabs to get that looking a lot better. Alrighty, and if I give this a save here, this is the media query. This is what we're doing. So notice over here, it's just black still. And if we scroll the page, we're going to come up to 500 pixels, real close now, and there it goes, right? Everybody see what's happening there? It's going from black to red like that. And that's the power of the media query. That's what it enables us to do. We start with that really one color, one design, then we add some CSS, and it changes, right? So this is the power. This is what media queries enable us to do. So any questions right now on the syntax or what we're doing? I'm sure there's questions around what do you mean by min width? What does that mean? We're going to look at that in a second. But what other questions do we have right now? We're going to check out Slido here. Alrighty, so we're feeling good. So media queries are again, this is how, like the Airbnb site, we say at this certain size, we're going to make some changes here. And media queries are super powerful because we can use them in conjunction with inheritance, in conjunction with specificity, right? To style up some parts of our design and then selectively change bits and pieces of it, right? And so this is where like CSS becomes really, really powerful for us. So for instance, if I came over here to the beginning again, right? And let's say like there are some styles I wanted to have across all the different screen sizes, right? So if I want it to always be like 40 pixels large and maybe to always have like an underline, we can do that. And then we can sort of progressively select the changes we want to add with our media queries here. So for instance, let's change some things here. We'll say H1 again. And we'll say font size, 40 pixels, like I said, right? And then we'll say, oh, let's make this a little smaller so we can just see it over here. And then we'll say text decoration. And we'll say underline. So we'll add an underline to it. And then maybe on smaller screens now, I want it to be maybe like green or something like that. So we'll say color is equal to green. All right, so now if we give this a save, what's going to happen when we go over 500 pixels again? Let's take a look. So if we start scrolling here, notice how it keeps the underline and it keeps the font size, but the only thing that's changing is the color itself, right? That color red is changing here. And this is like a tricky concept, I think, the first time you see it and when you start practicing it, but it really makes media queries so powerful. So what you can do is you can define how you want it to look across all of your experiences, and then really selectively target the property that you want to change here. But notice it's still keeping font size 40 pixels in the text decoration. Those aren't changing. You don't have to like copy and paste them every time you want to write a media query. You're not overwriting them just because they don't exist. Instead, you're only overwriting the property that you're specifying in here. So we're only overwriting the color property. We're not overwriting any of the other properties inside of our already defined styles here. Does that make sense for everybody? Everybody see what's going on there?
Yeah, so if you did want to, like, at a smaller size, change the font size so it was like smaller or something, then you could put it in font size like 30 pixels or 20 pixels in under the media tag, and that would change it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's walk through that. That's a really good example here. So that's a really common one, right? We want it to be a little smaller on mobile, and then on a larger screen, we're going to make it a bit larger, right? So how would we go about do that? Again, we want this to be like maybe 20 pixels or 21 pixels to start. So let's just change this to 21 pixels here. And again, now it's 21 across the board, but we want it to be 40 pixels once it goes over 500 pixels in width on the screen size here. So all we have to say is here, inside of the media query, font size is equal to 40 pixels, like that. And now we get that a save. When we go over 500 pixels, the height changes, or sorry, the size of the text changes there, right? And so we're defining it, we're being explicit, we're saying this has to be 21 pixels until we go over 500. And when we go over 500, we're going to reset the size to 40 pixels. So that's what's going on there. Does that help clarify? Does that make more sense?
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I have an additional question. Can you put in 2 plugs to change the font size? So like if we wanted 800 pixels, it to go up by another 20 points. Can we do that as well?
Absolutely,
Okay.
right? So remember how Airbnb, it started with one design, right? They had it kind of the hero image and then the form, and then they separated it out. Then they had the nice big background, but the nav was still missing. And then you got even larger a third time, and the navigation sort of appeared up top. We can have multiple media queries targeting different screen sizes. And so let's say we wanted to do that, right? So let's write it out. Let's practice here. We'll say at media. We always start with at media. Then we have our conditional, and that is where we're going to be making the change. So we'll say min width, and let's just do 600 pixels here just to keep it kind of close together. And now we can say, okay, what do we want to change? We want our H1 to get a little bit larger. So we'll say H1, and we'll do font size, and we'll do like 60 pixels here so we can really see it, right? So now we've got 2 media queries. So we give this a save, and we start small, we get larger, and we change the red, and then we get even larger here. And notice the color didn't change, right? We didn't have to redefine the color or anything. We only are changing the font size here. So we're kind of building up our interface here. We're starting from that mobile first, that smallest size, and we're slowly building up to a larger, more complete version of our desktop interface here. So that's kind of mobile first here in action. Does that help clarify? Does that make sense? Awesome, awesome, awesome. What other questions do we have? But I heard somebody else on mute.
You're kind of noticing on the min width pattern, right? Would that be like, could you switch that to like max width, and then thinking of that area as the mobile version of the whole thing? Because if you switch it to max width, if you put it up bigger, then it goes to the other one. You have that max of 400 pixels or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm glad you brought this up because it's exactly what we're going to talk about next. What is max width, right? So we have these 2 competing concepts, max width and min width here. And they're both how we define our conditionals, right? They're just 2 different ways we can go about it. So what min width it says anything beyond 500 pixels or greater than 500 pixels, that's where we're going to apply the CSS that is inside of here. What max width is essentially saying is that anything below 500 pixels, that is where we're going to apply these styles here. So they're the opposites of each other. Min width is saying everything beyond or greater than, and then max width is saying anything less than or below the size here. So how would we go about doing that? Let me go and comment all this out here, and we'll just comment out, but we'll try and recreate it using max width here. So we can get rid of our HTML because we know what it is, just an H1, and we'll comment this out here. Okay, so now,
sorry, I have a quick question. Yeah, so it's not necessarily that it's counterintuitive. You're just identifying the breakpoints of your screens.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, got you.
Yeah, that's all that we're doing here. We're using, and breakpoint's still the terminology that we use, right? So this 500 pixels, the 600 pixels, those are our breakpoints. And we're just kind of specifying that within our CSS, within our code there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. No question. No problem. Alrighty. So what are we going to do here? We're going to take a look at max width now, right? So we'll say at media. And so what we want it to do is we want it to be these styles under 500 pixels, and then we want it to be this one between 500 and 600, and then we want it to be this one over 600 here. So we kind of have to think about it from the opposite direction because of where we want it to end up. We're kind of going the other way. So what we'll do is we'll say H1 is equal to font size 60 pixels, right? And what that'll do is that'll set it to 60 pixels on those larger screens. And now we have to go the other way and kind of start reversing the design here. So then we'll say at media, and we'll say max width this time instead of min width. So we'll say max width. And here we can say 600 pixels, right? Because at 600 pixels, we want to apply these other changes here. And then we'll say H1 font size equal to 40 pixels. And then we'll do color red, like that. So we get this a save here, and we bring the screen down to like 600 pixels, right? Now we're back to where we were. We're back to this starting from large and going all the way down. And actually what's going on here? So this color red should be over in our H1 here as well, because we want it to be red on those larger sizes. And so sometimes you're gonna, as you practice this, right, you're gonna say, oh, okay, this wasn't quite my intention. That's all right. Definitely, like pros do this all the time, right? It's not like we get it right the first time and we're golden. We'll start something and then it's like, oh, you know what, that's in the wrong spot. I'm gonna have to move it around here. So this color red here, it's in the wrong spot. We want it actually to be on that outside H1 here, just like that. Alrighty, so now it's red across both of these here. And we're probably going to need that text decoration as well, because that is also across everything here. So we'll go ahead and we'll say text decoration. We'll say underline. Okay, so now we've got that, and we're just targeting the font size changes. Great. Okay, and now we've got one more, and now we want to say at media, max width, and we'll do 500 pixels here. And then we're going to make it that small font size again. So I think it was 21 pixels, right? So now we would say H1 font size 21 pixels, like this. Alrighty, so we get this a save now. And we go smaller. Now we've recreated the same design that we had a moment ago. Although it looks like we did have it go green there as well. So we'll say color green. Alrighty. And now we've really recreated everything. But we did it kind of with a different paradigm, a different setting. So what you do this way is you kind of have to set up everything, all your styles for the desktop version, and then you slowly shrink it and make it smaller and apply what you want it to be on those mobile styles, on those smaller screen styles. So does everybody see the difference there between max width and min width? Any questions so far on what's going on? Alrighty. So with those two different paradigms, right, you tend to pick one or the other. We're going to look tomorrow at like which one you would typically pick. So today we're just going to be focused on practicing a little bit more. But there is one that is a little bit more preferred, and we've kind of alluded to it already. And as you can see by which one I was faster and better at, you can probably tell which one I've practiced a lot more. So there is one that you tend to want to use, and we're going to talk about why tomorrow in a lot more detail here. But you can use both patterns here. It's not like one is better than the other. There's just one that's a little bit more preferred, a little more of a best practice. And we'll unpack that, like I said, tomorrow. Alrighty, so right now we've only been doing one element inside of our media query, right? And let me, maybe we'll comment this one out just so we can see it a little bit easier. And we'll go back to our min width here. So it's a little closer to our HTML. Okay, so right now we've been targeting this H1 here, but what if we had like a bigger page, right? What if we had more content, more information? If we go back to employee here, we've got like a lot of HTML on this page already. And it would be kind of a pain if we had to like have a different media query for every single piece, right? So it turns out we can actually write multiple CSS declarations inside of our media queries here, right? So if I wanted to add, like, let's say an H2 here, and I'd say, what a great day, something like that. A great day. Now, if I wanted to target that at, say, like the 500 pixel breakpoint or the 600 pixel, I can go in and do that, right? So let's say inside of 600 pixels, I want to make this a little bit larger, right? So I'll say H2 now, and I'll say font size, and maybe we'll say 40 pixels here, right? And that's a lot larger, right? But it's small on all these other ones, right? So we can have multiple declarations inside of a media query, right? The way I like to think about these media queries here, right, is this is just regular CSS. It's CSS, we know, we've practiced, we can use classes, IDs, selectors, whatever selector we want, that's no problem. But what this media query is saying is don't let the CSS join the page unless whatever this condition is in the experience has been met, right? So it's kind of like a guard or a gate around all the CSS that we've already written, and we don't unlock it until this condition or this criteria has been met. But once it has been, we just add it to the page like normal, right? Like it's always been, like it's been a part of our CSS the entire time. Basically ignore the media query, and we just say, here's our CSS as we've come to know it. Does that make sense for everybody? Any questions there?
I mean, my guess is the question is yes, but I mean the answer is yes. But could you make a whole nother CSS file and link the at media to that file? So it
You certainly,
reads that whole CSS, yeah.
you can. The way you would do that is you would have like your certain, like let's say you had like your tablet style sheet, right? So you would have main.css, which is just the generics, and then you would have tablet.css. And at the top and the bottom, you would have your media query, and then you can write all of your CSS inside of there. You can do it that way. The downside to that approach is that you don't have everything contextualized. So you kind of have to say like, okay, like for instance, if we're talking about these cards, for instance, right? You would have your card class fundamentals, your baseline stuff established in main.css. And then you would have to go to a completely different file to see your tablet stuff. And then you would have to go to a different file to see the desktop. And so you add a lot of complexity, even though you think you're organizing it, because you can't see everything right next to each other. So typically, you see more of this pattern here, where you have an element that's kind of defined, and then right below it, you have like the media query specifics for that given section, right? Because then as you're scrolling your code, you don't have to jump around between a bunch of different files. Instead, you have everything nice and contextualized here, so you can say, oh, okay, I know what's going on. I understand what's happening here. Does that help clarify that a bit more?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. When we actually start working in employ here and we start cleaning it up with our media queries, I think that's going to become a lot clearer there and hopefully make it easier to see and understand. Awesome. Any other questions? Alrighty then. So let's go and practice this together now that we've kind of got our heads wrapped around the concept here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some breakout rooms. And there we go. That should be good. Move everybody around a little bit. Alrighty. And inside of those breakout rooms, you're going to be working on this code pen here. So I'm going to drop this in the channel for everybody. Alrighty. So that code pen, it has instructions inside of it. So just follow the instructions, practice your media queries. Don't forget that meta tag. And we'll probably reconvene in about 15 minutes or so. So good luck, and we'll see you all in a little bit.
Hello.
Hi, Kyla.
How are you guys?
So did he tell us what he wants us to do, or?
So there's a code pen that he dropped a link to. And so all the instructions are in there.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. Brandon, did you get that? Like, are you looking at it?
Yeah, I have it opened up right now on my
Great.
browser.
Okay.
The instructions are in the CSS.
Yes. Add a viewport meta tag while editing the pen setting.
Oh, yeah. Settings. HTML.
Viewport meta tag. Editing the pen setting. Okay, so we're just adding. Should I share my screen, Brendan? Or we'll just.
I guess, yeah. So I guess to maybe work on it together. Do you want to share yours? I can share mine too.
I'll share mine.
Okay.
Okie dokie. Great. So the first one is he just wants us to add a viewport meta tag.
From the site.
Which, according to my note, sits under the header, which we don't have.
For task 1.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for that one, it's when we went to the settings in the top right.
At the minute about editing the pen setting.
Or like see right next to save. Yeah. And then if you go to HTML and then scroll to the bottom, that little button. Yeah, that's it.
Oh, okay.
And then and then you just save and close it.
Oh, okay. So that's the first one. Okay, and then click the gear icon next to HTML section in the title.
That was for the instructions for what we just did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So now we're on
reading this part now.
Yeah, I know. So save the pen to your account and press the full screen preview button in the bottom toolbar to see your code in a separate window so you can resize it.
We do that first, and then I press the full screen preview. So that's it. It's really annoying with Zoom because Zoom is kind of in the way.
I know. Yeah, it is kind of that. With two screens, be much easier.
So we changed it to full screen, full page view. Oh no, what is that? What's happening here? Gosh.
You need to verify.
That's so weird. They're emailing you directly. Do you have that, or I can't even get out of it now? Hold on.
I think I've verified my email already, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, how come I've never done it? Like, why? Because we never had to do it.
Yeah, I can share my screen if you want. So
I'll stop sharing and then stop verifying. So we're just.
Okay, cool. I'll just pull up mine.
Thank you. Share screen. I did actually verify it. This is really odd. Oh wow. I remember doing this before.
My computer's being very slow, so bear with me.
Okay, I'm actually really scared. I'm gonna do something now. That's.
Oh, there we go.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
How's it going?
Pretty good. My computer's being slow for a second, but it just loaded up. So
Nice.
Yeah, I think we just finished test 2, so we can see the live preview of it right there.
Nice.
So a media query with 400 pixel width break. Oh.
That's the parentheses.
Where is it? There. Yeah. And then min.
Why is it not working?
Button background.
I think mine is fine. Okay, cool. So add a media query with. So I would have thought you put the media query after the button, or add media query with 400. Inside the chain. Okay, change the button background to green. Is it green now? Can't see it.
I think you're missing a curly bracket.
2 curly brackets, if I count correctly.
For
So before the button. Let's see.
There you go. That's it.
And green.
so how would I change the width?
Sometimes you might have to refresh that page there. Let's see.
So you had, Brendan, you had written background color. Is that, should it just be background?
Doesn't matter. Because
I just, in the code above it just says background, so.
Oh, yeah. Then I guess so. Button. Okay.
Oh, you need to save your code pen.
Oh, yeah. I don't have it on autosave, which I should.
I
There you go.
have an auto save. Your
Yeah,
work
you should.
save. Mine didn't. Okay.
Alrighty. We're gonna hop into the next group. So, but y'all are on the right track here. So, good job.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome.
Okay, so add a media.
Okay, so add a video 500.
So we haven't added them. Oh, okay, no, we did. Minimum width. So add another minimum width media query at 500 breakpoint.
Mhm.
So, okay. Can you add it within the same? Because I think that's what he said. Actually, I need to ask him this question. Talking about adding,
I think you need like
starting a new one.
a separate one completely just for 500. Yeah, so not inside previous one, but just
Okay.
like a separate one entirely. I think is what they're saying.
Brackets and then minimum width. Yep. And then curly bracket. Yes.
Didn't forget this time.
Change background to red. Great. This one should work.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Nice.
Cool.
Okay, so let's go further. Task 5. Add another minimum width. Okay. Instead, change something other than the background. I wonder if we can change the button size.
Or the color of the text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could do both, I guess.
Is that? Oh no, the bracket is in the other way. Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, you need a bracket after media, like a small. Yeah. Mhm.
So button.
Button.
We can go maybe font size. What's it at right now? 1 rem.
Oh, where are you? Sorry, I lost you on the page.
I was just looking at the current CSS.
Right. He still wants us to do 600. So I think we need to do the 600 one first and then change, because he said add another media query at 600 pixels. So let's do 600 pixel first. and then inside it, change it to something else.
Like the one, like how I have it right now?
Yeah, like we go back to minimum width again as 600. Oh yeah, and then button font size.
I'm not too familiar with rem. I forget.
Maybe we add 21px.
21px. Okay.
Let's just try it.
So 1 rem equals 16 pixels.
Whatever.
So then 2 would be what for these two? 1.5. Okay. So if it's at 1, maybe try
You
2.
1.5. Oh, okay. 2 rem. It's gonna be huge though, no?
2 rem. I'm guessing that'll just be double the size of what it is now.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Save it and then yes.
Nice.
Ah, great, because I thought the text will change and the button stays the same.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice that it resized it.
Awesome. So task 6, I think we're done with this one. At a max with media query at 300. Great. So that should be just the same. So at medium.
Parentheses, max.
Oh, no.
Let's see if we can get it done.
Okay, we can, yeah. 300. Yeah, and then your curly brackets. Yeah, great. Change background to purple. So background, purple. Yeah, color. Great. Save.
What went wrong?
Did it not happen? It says, what did we do wrong button?
So it should be the background color, right? So we actually want to change background to purple.
Oh, shoot.
Color actually does the text.
Yeah. Oh.
Alrighty, hello everybody. So it looked like everybody was able to complete or mostly complete the challenge here. So great job working with everybody. I will post the solution for everybody, so that way you all can review it if you just want to see how I would approach it. Again, with code, there's no right or wrong answer, which is I think part of the appeal, but also part of the frustration sometimes. So you just have to look at a lot of different ways to go about doing something and see it. But it looks like everybody was on the right path there, so great job. Awesome. So I think we've got our minds wrapped around viewports, the viewport meta tag, and media queries a bit more. So now we can really start getting into our employee mockups and actually creating a more responsive experience there. But before we do that, let's go ahead and take our break, and we'll see y'all in about, let's say like 7 minutes now. So we'll see y'all then. Alrighty, that's our break. So let's come back, cameras on, and keep rolling on our employee dashboard. So I shared in the channel just now with everybody 2 mockups. We have our desktop mockup and our mobile mockup, right? Because now we're stepping into responsive design. So we have 2 different versions of the interface that we're trying to be creating. So we're going to be working on kind of adding some functionality or some CSS here, maybe to make this look more like these cards here on mobile, and also kind of some other little details. We're not going to have an image here, and then the footer is going to be a little bit smaller. And then on our other screens, we're going to have this kind of grid view here and a bunch of other details. And of course, looking at our design here, we're still missing a lot of things. We're a lot closer than we used to be, but we've got a while to go before we're exactly perfect, right? We've got a couple of things to change, but we're definitely on the right track here, definitely getting closer. So let's go and start looking at this sort of from mobile. Oh, I lost our preview there. So if you exit out of DevTools when you have the preview installed, it will get rid of it because it will go back to desktop. That's what was happening there. I got rid of this a little too early here. Okay, so we've got our desktop view here. And let's go to our code now and kind of start working, sorry, I should say our mobile view. And now we can go to our code and actually start tweaking this a little bit more and making it a lot easier to work with here and to have that mobile experience. Okay, so main.css, index.html, we're here, and everything is looking good so far. So main.css. One thing I've noticed, right, kind of across the board is we're using this font family, Lato and sans serif, on a lot of our text, right? That's kind of all the text on the page. So this H2 and then these anchor tags here, right? But what we're seeing ourselves starting to do right now in our code is repeat this all over the place, right? We've got logo and font family, and then we've got nav anchor tags, font family. We've got the section A font family, right? And as a programmer, as a developer, anytime you start seeing yourself use something 1, 2, or 3 times, you start saying to yourself, is there a way I could rewrite this so it's more succinct and so I'm not repeating myself over and over and over again, right? I had a professor when I went to college. He always had this great little line: if something happens once, you can ignore it. If it happens twice, you pay attention to it. And if it happens 3 times, it's a freaking conspiracy. And so I always like to think about that when I'm going through my code here, right? And so we've got this little snippet here 3 times, and that's setting off alarms in my head, right? Is there a way that we can write this so it applies to all of the elements on the page, and we can just write it once and not have to worry about it? And there is a way we can do this. Does anybody have an idea? Does anybody have a guess about where we could put this font family and have it apply everywhere so we don't have to keep repeating it throughout the code?
In the body.
Any thoughts? We could put it on the body. Yeah, that's a really good spot as well. Is there another spot, maybe like a selector we already have in our CSS that we could use as well?
What about the asterisks?
Oh, I think I heard 2 people say maybe the same thing. The asterisks, right? The everything selector. That's definitely another place we can put it as well. Both of those are fine. The reason we might want to put it on the everything selector instead of the asterisks is because for certain types of elements, I think like anchor tags and labels and form controls, and we're going to learn more about forms later in the week. Putting it on the body isn't sufficient to override it, and so that's like sometimes like the body makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't cascade or inherit the way you would expect it to. So that's why we want to put it on the everything selector. That way, everything on the page is getting that font family there. So let's go ahead and do that, right? We'll do a little, this is called like a refactor, right? We're rewriting our code, we're reorganizing it to get it into a better, more readable spot here. So we'll go ahead, we'll hit Command X, and we'll just copy that over to our everything selector here, and then we can get rid of this and all the other spots here. All right, we get rid of it there in the nav A, and then, get rid of it there in the section A. And I think that's for all the spots we had it. And this is good fingers on keyboards, right? Make sure you're following along as I go through these examples here. Start cleaning this up a little bit more. And now we come over to our experience here. We save this side and we give this a refresh. Now the font is the same all over the place, right? We don't have to like worry about individually selecting it anywhere. So that's a nice little refactor for us. It's a nice little cleanup. Where else could we do some cleanup here? Let's think here. And so this is something like developers will do periodically. They'll go and they'll review their code. A lot of times they write a whole bunch of code just to get something working. And then they go and review their code and say, okay, how can I make this better, cleaner for the next person or myself in 3 months when I need to go read this code here, right? Is there anything I can do to make this a little bit more readable, a little bit more maintainable? I think there's some stuff we could do here with the card, and maybe like we're running into issues here where this text is running off the bottom here. But maybe that's going to be something like a little bit more involved that we're going to have to do in a little bit here. So let me start with our navigation here. We'll get that working and looking nice. And then we'll come back to our card and worry about how we're going to fix this, like going off the bottom, and also fix the styling here a little bit more. Okay, but I think we're in pretty good shape overall here. So starting with our nav, right? Let's go to our mockup here. Oh, that's the actual sketch file. We don't need to worry about that. We'll go to our mockup. Where'd it go? Did I exit out of it? No, here we go. So we have our, and we've got a couple of things going on, right? We've got our nav, which has sort of this white background. And then we have this background, which is sort of this light gray color. And then we've got employees, teams, reports, but we don't have the image anymore, right? We're going to want to hide that image from ourselves. And we've got this box shadow going on as well. So all these like nice little details we should probably start adding in, make it look a little bit more polished, a little bit more professional. Okay, so let's start with like this figure ground, right? Our Gestalt principles at work here. We've got this background, and then we have our like our box shadow here. So I think that's going to be like a nice upgrade for us here. So if we go into our nav, right? As we can see, we don't have a background here, but it's white anyway, and we don't have this sort of gray background in all the other places. So how are we going to add that gray background? How are we going to put that onto the page? The way when I try and approach those kind of layering problems, I like to think of what's the big thing. I'll add that, and then I can layer it on top of that there. So the big thing is the whole background of the page, and then I can layer on top of that, right? All the other things. So we think about our nesting structure, right? Our body is encompassing all the other content on the page here. So that's probably where we're going to want to put this gray background. I'll put it right on the body, and then I can get more specific. I can say the nav, that should have the white background, and that will override the background coloring there, right? So let's go ahead and I'll go and let's grab the color here from our sketch file. So let's see here. We've got the employee desktop. And this is the background color here. So I'm just going to go and copy and paste this, and I'll drop it in the channel for everybody so that way we can see it. There is the hex value for the background. And I'm going to go and put this right on the body here. So we'll say body. And we can say background here. And we'll set it to this hex value like this. And we got to give that a save. Forgot we're not in CodePen anymore. And now we can see we have this gray background everywhere, right? And so this is what I was talking about, right? We were applying this to the big picture thing first, and then we can take a step in and overwrite something that's a little bit smaller. So the next thing we're going to want to do is probably add a background to the nav, right? To make sure that is having that white background. And we already have our nav selector here, so let's start here. We'll say background. And we'll use the white hex value, and that's just FFF. So we'll do FFF, FFF, so 6 Fs. And we'll go ahead and we'll give this a refresh. And now we're already looking a lot better, right? Everything is coming together here nicely. But if we look at this really closely, we can see there's like this little border or margin around the outside here. And sometimes you're going to run into this. There's going to be something set on something, you're not quite sure what that's coming from. So it's going to throw you off guard. We're going to learn on Wednesday how we do this in a more procedural sort of manner. It's kind of thinking about it ahead of time. But for right now, how are we going to fix this, right? So one thing I like to do, if there's something going on that I'm not quite sure what's happening, we go into our inspect here, and I'm just kind of like going up the tree, right? I'm looking at like, okay, there's nothing like pushing this around that I can see. The nav looks like it's okay. There's no margin kind of showing up around it. But if I get to the body, right, notice that little orange rectangle, that's like our box model is yelling at us, right? And so it's saying, okay, there's something being set on here. So if I click on the body, I can actually go in here and I can look at the CSS styles that are being applied to it. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh, margin 8 pixels, that's just kind of default, it's kind of the browser settings. So where you see like user agent style sheet, that means it's coming from the browser itself. If you see main.css, that's coming from us, right? That's our file name. So user agent style sheet, and notice how it's like kind of grayed out versus this white background here. It's kind of saying this is sort of the default styling that's coming in. So I can say, okay, great, I want to get rid of that. Maybe I'll reset that to 0. And if I wanted to prototype this and kind of see it before I put it into my code, I could do that right here. So if I click into the body and I click margin and I set this to 0, right, I can see real time what's happening over here in my code. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is working. This is what I want it to be doing. If I uncheck it, okay, that's what it was. And now I check it again. I can get a sense like, okay, that's the right solution. I'm on the right track here. That's pretty useful, right? I didn't have to worry about like saving it in my file and coming back. And so this is a really powerful workflow to get ourselves into here. Okay, so I'm going to go to the body here as well. I'm going to say margin. 0. Great. And we get that a save over here in our main.css. We get this a refresh. We're a step closer now, right? And it's just all these little steps that add up to to our interfaces here. Okay, so we have employee, and we have we were going to add that box shadow next, right? So I think we already have a box shadow on the cards here. I'm pretty sure it's the same box shadow. So we'll just go down here and we'll copy it. And again, so this is like my spidey senses are tingling, right? I'm doing this once, I'm doing it in another spot. And normally if you're doing it in 2 places, it's kind of okay, right? Again, it's you pay attention at 2. But if I'm gonna do it a 3rd time, I'm kind of saying to myself, is there some way I can abstract this? Can I make like another class for this and just apply it where I need to? Can I use a selector list? Does that make more sense, right? So we're not quite there yet, but I'm paying attention now. I'm like, I'm really tuned in because I'm using this in a lot of different spots. So we just pasted that into the nav here, and I give this a refresh, and now we have our box shadow here. So this is pretty nice, right? We're really getting a step closer now. So we've got to adjust, it looks like the padding on the inside of this navigation here a little bit more, right? Give it some of that internal spacing. When I think about the box model, everything that's happening inside is padding. Everything that's happening on the border is the border itself, and everything beyond that is margin. So now we're thinking about, okay, how do I add some padding inside of here? And we really only want padding that looks like, actually, maybe we'll add a little bit of padding all around it, right? So we could say something like padding is equal to, have you all seen the shorthand property of padding yet? Did Christian go over that with everybody? I'm seeing some shaking heads. Okay, let's talk about that. So we can be really explicit with padding, right? We can say like padding dash left, that should be like 10 pixels. And then we can say padding right, that should be 10 pixels. And then padding top, maybe we'll do like half, we'll do like 5 pixels. Oh, sorry, we'll do padding top, 5 pixels. And then padding bottom, we'll say 5 pixels as well. And if I get that a refresh, right? Okay, that's looking a lot nicer. We've got some space from the outside, but the background's going all the way to the edges there because we're using padding, we're not using margin. If we use margin, we'd actually see it all around, and we'd have that spacing again. But because we're using padding, we're making the box, like we're adding packing peanuts to our cardboard box there and smushing everything on the inside as opposed to the outside. And so we're all right, we're on the right track here. But again, my spidey senses are tingling, right? I'm saying like, I wrote this like 4 times here. It feels like a lot, like to just do something as simple as manipulate the box model, right? Well, it turns out we can use the shorthand property to target each of these sides as well, as opposed to having to put it on 4 independent lines there. So the way we do this, right? If we wanted to say like padding 10 pixels on all sides, we could say padding 10 pixels, right? And this will say, okay, apply this to all sides. But if we wanted to say, do it 10 pixels on the left and the right, and then 5 pixels on the top and the bottom, the way we would do this is like this. We can say 5 pixels, and what this means is top and bottom, and then 10 pixels on the left and the right. So this gives us a little bit more control, right? And I only have to write it here once instead of like writing it out all 4 times like this here. So this is like the equivalent, right? These both mean the same thing. And if we give this a refresh, our design didn't change, but I'm writing this in a much smaller amount of code than having to write out each of those lines individually here. So this is how we can use the shorthand properties. This works for margin as well. So it's the same thing, top and the bottom with the first value, and then left and the right for the second value. So that is the shorthand property. We can take this a step further and actually target each side individually with the shorthand property as well. So the way we would do that, we would say the first value is 5 pixels, that's the top. 10 pixels is for the right-hand side of the box. So that'll be the right-hand side. Then we could say like 20 pixels for the bottom. And then I could say 15 pixels for the left-hand side. So we're kind of going clockwise there. Top, right, top, right, bottom, left, right? So in that motion, we can target each of the sides individually. Now, if I give this a refresh, things are going to be shifted around a little bit more, right? But this is how I could target each side, the top, right, left, and the bottom, individually with 1 line of code there. So this is how we can shorten up our code, make it a little bit more succinct and easy to use. And again, it's only easy if you understand it, right? And if you take the time to kind of practice and understand what's going on here, but it does help clean up your code a little bit more and make it easier, not like this huge block of information, but just information you can process. Any questions there on that syntax or what's going on with the shorthand properties?
I think they mentioned that just briefly, but they mentioned trouble, top right, bottom left.
Yeah, I
to
think Gabe
remember.
told us that about
Yeah,
margin.
I think it was Gabe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to remember it too. That's actually really smart. So yeah, so you can do it with margin as well. So if you wanted to do it with margin, no problem. But this is what's going on there. This is that top, right, bottom, left, and then if you're only using two, it's just the top and then the left and the right, the top and bottom, left and right. So that's what's going on there, and you can use that with margin or padding. So let's take it back to where it was. We can get rid of all of this code, right, and just have this nice one-liner of padding here. Right? Developers, their mindset, they're all about making things quicker, doing things more efficiently, right? So when you're working with them, this is how they are operating. This is what they are thinking. And so you want to present your information or the material that you use to them in the most efficient way possible, in sort of shorthand ways, if possible. You want to make sure you're speaking the same language. Don't use like acronyms that they don't understand. But you can really make their lives easier if you kind of shorten everything up, make it easy for them to understand, because that's the mindset they operate within. Alrighty, so we've got our nav here, and this is looking pretty good so far, right? If we take a look at our navigation here, this is looking pretty good. The only thing that I can see right now is there are two little details here. One of them might just be, my HTML might be a little off. We kind of have employees that has that background property there, or sorry, the darker color. And then we don't have the image tag, which is currently appearing over here. Let's fix, this could just be an HTML fix on my part here. So if I go back to index.html, yeah, I don't have a class on this. So I'm just going to add class equal to active. So I can add a refresh. All right, so that was the quick fix there. And now, if I keep rolling, my mouse just, okay, there we go. Mouse is connected again. So now we have this one. And now let's go and look at our image here. So on small screens, on mobile, we don't want an image, but on larger screens, it'll take me over there, we do want to have this image here. So this is, again, we're going between artboards. This is media queries, right? We're going to make that shift between an experience that doesn't have something and one that does have something, right? So media queries are going to be our friend here. So how are we going to approach this here? What can we do? So if we go down to our nav image here, we have the width and the height defined here, and that's great, but we want it to be kind of hidden on mobile. So what if we did it like this? I'm going to set the display of this to none, and then I'll add a media query that changes the display back to block or inline block or something like that. So let's see if that's going to work for us here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say display block like this. And if we give that a save and give this a refresh, nav image, it's not going, oh, because I'm doing display block. I should do display none. There we go. It's hard to talk and type at the same time. Okay, so now we're doing pretty good here. And it looks like, if we look at this again, there's like extra spacing over here relative to over here. So these little details, that's what we have to train our eye for, make sure we're catching as both designers and developers, right? And if we look at this here, nav links, what's going on here? Oh, it's because we're spacing them evenly and we're aligning items to the center. So maybe, how can we do this a little bit differently here? Maybe if we justify, or we say space between, I guess it's a little closer. Space evenly, that kind of makes sense though. Space evenly. Maybe we need to take this width off. And let's see here, space between. So sometimes you just have to play with it. You have to say, okay, maybe I can take this off. And that's why these dev tools are so nice for that. You're like, okay, I don't want the width anymore. I'll just toggle that on and off. I don't want to justify content. I can come in here, I can change it, I can mix things up. So this is a really nice way if you're troubleshooting your CSS to get a sense for how you can go about doing that. Let's see here, align items flex. Okay, so that's not exactly working the way we want. Maybe another thing we could do, instead of trying to be like explicit and using space between or space evenly, is we could add a little bit of margin left to each of these anchor tags here. And that might give us the control we need in these different scenarios here. So how can we do that? So if I go into our nav links here, and we have this, and I'm just going to comment out with and align item center for now. And then in nav A, I can say margin left. And what if I just did like 10 pixels just to start, just to see how it looks? All right, that's like closer to what we want now, right? And do we see like conceptually what I was doing? They're both achieving something very similar, but now I don't have to set like an explicit width, and I don't have to like try and match it with the space evenly. And in fact, we could probably use a little bit more spacing there. So maybe I'll say 20 pixels, right? Alrighty, and that looks pretty good. And now we're going to, so we have this image here, right? And if I just take off display none, and the way I'm doing those fast comments, by the way, I'm holding down Command/. And so if you just put your cursor on some text and hit Command/, you can comment it out right away, which is really, really useful, again, for your productivity. And so now we've got like a little bit of, we need some more spacing here. So maybe now that we have this in here, we'd want to say margin left, and we'll also do 20 pixels. So now we're pushing this off the edge of the page here, but we have the spacing in here, like the unique spacing. And you're probably saying like, oh, this is broken, right? It's not going to work for us anymore. But remember, right, we're actually not going to see this on our mobile screens. We're going to hide it. So now I can hide this again. It's got all the styles that it's going to need, but I've hidden it, right? And so now I don't have to worry about it getting pushed off. And now I can add my media query. So we'll say something like at media, and let's use our min width here, right? Because we're building up, we want it to be greater than. So we'll say min width, and let's say like 800 pixels. Just for the sake of this design. Normally, you've predefined your breakpoints, right? You've worked with your developers, you've done your analytics, you've done your user research, and you've talked to your users. What kind of devices are you currently using? How would you like to access this experience, right? And you have a better sense for like what you're targeting. So for instance, if 80% of your users are using an iPhone 6, right? You want to make sure that your breakpoint corresponds to the size of that device. But you can just kind of pick them out of a hat as well if you don't have something to really go off of. Typically, you target device sizes anyway. We're just, for practice, targeting random, nice, even 100 numbers. But you do try to make them a little bit more specific. So actually, in that mindset, 768 is a typical mobile device size. So we'll go ahead and target that for now, right? Just to make sure it's a little bit more realistic here. So we're targeting 768. So we'll go ahead and we'll add our curly brackets. Again, you need curly brackets with the media query. You need some way to encapsulate the CSS that is inside of here. Don't forget those. And now we can target our nav image. So we'll say nav image, same selector that we've been using. We'll add our curly brackets because that's for the CSS. That's the content we'll do inside of there. And which property do we want to overwrite? Just that display one, right? So we'll say display. And we'll just say block for right now. Let's see what happens. Alrighty. So now, if I stretch my screen, it's not going to grow. So what I can do here is I can go to responsive mode. And this is like a nicer way you can kind of play with everything, kind of like CodePen, right? You can see how everything is happening here. And I think it would help if I saved and refreshed. Not CodePen, it's not doing the auto refresh for me. There we go. So now we can see as the page gets to 768, it adds in that image there, which is pretty cool, right? Now we're starting to step into our responsive design and get things a little bit more organized. Now, of course, you can break it if you go really small. You don't typically have devices that are this small unless you're designing for like a watch or something. So you only have to go down to like 300, 400 pixels. And there we go. Alrighty, so I think that's our navigation, right? That's a responsive nav between what we need on mobile and what we need on desktop there. Maybe we can increase the spacing on desktop, right? In between those. And so this is what a developer is doing. They're looking at your mockup, they're going back and forth, they're saying, what's going on over here? That looks about right. Okay, here we're going to add a little bit more spacing and figure things out. And this is just the process here. And so you might have noticed here, we put our media query down right underneath the nav image because we're keeping them contained. I want to know everything that's happening to the nav image, so I don't have to go look for it in like different files or different places. So I think that's a really nice practice to kind of get used to here. So for this nav anchor tag here, let's go ahead and we'll say, maybe we'll bump up the margin to 30 or something like that. And we'll do the same thing for the image. So we'll say here, we'll say at that larger screen size, we'll do margin left. I'll say 30 pixels. And now we can go ahead and say at media, min width, 768, curly bracket, nav A, because that's what we want inside of here. And we'll say margin left 30 pixels. Alrighty. We'll come back over here, give it a refresh. And that's looking better, right? We add just a little bit more space there between all those items. It's not perfect, right? We definitely would have to dive into the mockup, make sure we're perfectly aligned there, but we're a step closer. And I think that's what matters right now for what we're trying to do. So any questions so far on media queries, how we would use them, how we would start designing for, our responsive interface this way? Everybody following along? Any questions?
Just a quick question. Where did you add the image? I kind of lost it.
Where did I add this individual image, or?
Was it in the nav bar?
It should be in the nav bar. So we have inside of our nav, we have this nav links, and then the image is inside of there.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Alrighty then. So let's keep rolling here. We've got a whole bunch more to do. And again, so as you comment stuff out to kind of practice, see what's working, what isn't working, once you've got it to a good spot, you tend to want to delete those comments, right? You don't want to leave any extra code that could confuse you in the future. So you want to make sure you're removing your comments when they've outlived their usefulness to you. Okay, so now we're looking at this grid here, right? If I make this smaller, if we go back to our iPhone 6 size here, we've got to make some adjustments to how this is being presented, how this information is working here relative to the mobile experience, right? So it's going to be more of this horizontal card, and we're going to have to tweak the text sizing and all that important stuff as well. Okay, so let's start doing that. So the first thing we're probably going to want to do, if we come over to our card here, is maybe we're going to have to make some adjustments over here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of the width and the height. The reason being is we're going to want to add those in, but we want to add them in later, right, when our page is larger. So for right now, though, I'm going to just get rid of them because we want it to go all the way to the end of the page, right? We're going to see how we can do that explicitly tomorrow when we learn more about responsive units. But right now, we can just do it, we can just get rid of them like that. So that way it formats itself to the space available. Alrighty, so we give that a refresh here. And this is looking a lot cleaner already, right? We've got everything inside of the card behaving nicely, and it's going to like the full width of the page there. So that's already a huge win for us, right? Okay, so that's sort of the first little thing that we've done. And now we need to kind of worry about how do we flip the card itself, right? How are we going from a horizontal to a vertical and vice versa? Well, in my mind, that is screaming Flexbox, right? Anytime you need to start moving things horizontally versus vertically and having real control over that environment, that is what Flexbox is so powerful for. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say, instead of inline block here, let's go ahead and say display flex and get a sense for what that's doing. We'll say display flex, and we'll give this a refresh. And I think we broke it, right? Our images are just gone, and everything else is over here. So I wonder why the image is gone. But this is not what we wanted, right? But we're kind of a step closer, right? We've got all of
Curious. My image is not gone.
Your image is not gone. That is interesting. Wonder what's going on there. So sometimes we can inspect and we can get a sense for what's going on. Why is that collapsing? We've got that explicitly set. I think we want to get rid of, oh, weird. They all came back now. Let me try this. I have never seen this bug before. All right, it seems to be working now. Something weird with the cache might have been going on there. So what happens when your browser, when you give code to your browser, it's trying to hold on to it so it has the shortest load time for you. So basically what it looks for is from the server, did anything change? If not, we're going to send down the latest, we're going to send down the same code we served last time. So that's why when you like see updates, sometimes you have to clear your cache to force the browser to get the latest version. And so that's, I think, what was happening there, some sort of caching issue. Okay, so, but we've got this back. And now we've got like all of this content over here, but it's getting thrown over horizontally to the other side because it's in a Flex container, right? And so what we're probably gonna need to do here is actually tweak our HTML a little bit. So if we have our image, then if we wrapped all of this content inside of a div, right? Because we're going to use something presentational. We don't need something semantic, right? We're not trying to describe some information. But what this will do for us is it will put the image and all the text vertically next to each other, right? Let's go ahead and tweak that in one spot, and then we can see if that's working for us. So we'll come down to this section card here. We've got our H2. Okay, great. So we'll go ahead. We'll write a div here. We'll just do div like that. And then I'll go and I'll grab all of this content. A really cool trick here, if you select all this information, right? You highlight it and you hold down Option and you click up. You can actually move your code around, right? You can move it up or down in the hierarchy, in your sort of relationship between all of your other elements here. So that's a really nice way. You don't have to copy and paste it or cut and paste or anything like that to move your code around and kind of visually see where it is going. So that was Option up and down on your arrow keys. And that, I think, has got us into this new environment here. So we've got our div, and we've got our elements inside of there. Okay, this is closer, right? Again, we've got a step closer. For some reason, these images are going away, but I think this is going to help us out a lot. So we've got our image over here, and now we've got everything stacked up next to it. And now we can start tweaking, right? We can start saying, okay, how exactly is this going to be styled? But before we do that, let's fix all of our other cards. So the way I'm going to do this, we're going to use another trick here, another tip, is I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to click where I want to make these changes. So I'm going to click here, and did everybody see what's happening? Now I have two cursors. And what that means is I can write in two different places, which is pretty powerful, right? So if I need to make a bunch of changes all over the place, I can do that just by Option clicking, and it's going to happen much faster for me. So I'm going to click in front of all these H2s here. So that way I can encapsulate all of them inside of a div. Okay, so now we've got that in 7 spots, right? Because we have 8 cards and 7 more to go. And now I can open up a div, and that'll close, and I can hit enter. And if I come over here and grab this, and I hold down, Option, so that's not going to cooperate with me. So I'll hit enter there, and now I can do it. Okay. And that should do it. Okay. So did everybody see how I did that? I clicked in 7 different places, and I was able to quickly move around all of the content in all those different spots using the shortcuts that we just learned together here. Any questions on those shortcuts, or did that make sense for everybody? Seeing some nods, I'm seeing some puzzled faces here. So what questions do we have? Anything that went too quickly? Anything you didn't understand? We check Slido. Alrighty, let's keep rolling then. So now, if I get this a save, I get this a refresh, we have things much more organized, right? We've got them exactly a lot closer to where we want them to be defined here. And for some reason, Diego's not collapsing, but that's okay as well. I'm wondering if there's something going on with his image. Nope, all right. It's probably the content actually, yeah. So, okay, so now we can start adjusting this and making them look more like the mockup here. So what are we gonna do? We've got this card image, the height is set to 90 pixels. Maybe we can do justify between here. Maybe that'll help us. So we'll say justify content, and we'll do space between, right? Kind of push them over to their unique sides, their individual sides. Nope, that's not gonna quite do it here. I bet you these section anchor tags are probably a little bit too large here. So font size, that's some points for some reason. I must have miscopied that. And we'll do like 14 pixels here, see how those are looking. Okay, that's a lot better. Maybe 16 so we can actually read them. That's getting pretty good, awesome. We want these section anchor tags to be on their own lines as well, right? Right now they're kind of in line together, so they're kind of next to each other. So how would I switch something from something that's in line to something that's more blocked? Does anyone have any ideas? And how would we go about making that switch? Based on our display properties?
What was the question again?
So how would we go from something that's inline, like these two tags here? How did that just read? That was weird. How do we go from something that's inline here to something that's more block, and so they each have their own individual lines?
You have to do a display flex.
Display flex would work, but there's probably something we don't need to. Flex is really powerful when you have like nested elements and you need to sort of contain them together. But we're targeting these anchor tags individually, right? And so we don't have like the flex parent and the flex items inside of that. So there's actually like a more standard display that we could use to make them each have their own line, their own section in the code. Any thoughts there? If it's not display flex?
Wouldn't it be display block?
Yeah, display block, exactly. So that way they each have their own lines, right? So inside of our section anchor tag here, we can go ahead and say display. And we'll set this to block. Alrighty, and now they're each on their own line here. So this is pretty good. This is a step closer to what we wanted. And we're doing this justify content space between, but I'm noticing, right, it's pushing the content probably a little bit too far here because we're trying to separate them. So for Tommy, he's got like a really long title, and so that's taking up a lot of space. That's filling up that area. But Toa, she's got smaller content, and that's pushing them to the sides there. So that's not exactly what we want there. So we'll go ahead and we'll get rid of this justify content for now, and maybe we'll have to come up with a different way for doing that. Okay, and that fixed our image issue, right? They were getting smushed a little bit, but now that we got each of these anchor tags on their own line, they're in better shape here. Okay, what else can we do? What's our next step? So maybe we want to add a little bit of margin here, a little bit of spacing between the content and the image itself. So we can go ahead and do that. We'll say on the image, we'll do margin right because we only want it on one side. And when you're only doing it on one side, that's a perfectly okay time to use like the longer form version of the property. You don't have to individually set it on either side. So maybe we'll say like 15 pixels here, just to get it kind of separated. Okay, that's looking pretty good, right? We've got some separation. And now we can start really tweaking this information here. So we've got Tommy Carroll, we've got our customer support rep, and we've got all of this other information here as well. So let's go ahead and start actually targeting these. The first thing it looks like we're gonna wanna do is get Tommy like a little bit more aligned with the top of this, less in the middle. And we can do that, right? So we'll go to our card, and we'll go down here. We'll say card, we'll say H2. And what are we gonna say here? We'll say margin. I think we're gonna wanna set this to 0 all around. There we go. So then we got rid of that sort of top margin that was happening there, again, coming from our browser defaults, and we brought it closer to the top of the design here. And it's probably a little too large here. So if I wanted to maybe go to my mockups, right? That's a good spot to go look and see how large things are. I can say, okay, what is this? This is 21 pixels, and it's going to be bold there. So, okay, no problem. We'll say font size. 21 pixels, like that. Oh, gotta have the semicolon. Alrighty, so that's a little bit smaller now, so that's fitting even nicer there. And I think we had a slightly different font color as well. So let me go and check that again. I think we're using off-white. That's a good design tip as well. We tend not to use pure black in our designs because it's so attention grabbing. It's so focused. And so we want to make sure we're grabbing, like when we're using something and we're calling it black, we want to use something that's slightly off black because it's more accessible to the eyes and it's easier to see as well. So we'll go ahead and we'll say color. And we'll just pop that in. I put that in the Slack channel for everybody so you have the same hex value so you don't have to type it out. Okay, so that's already getting us a lot closer. And again, it's a really subtle thing. So this one is still like pure black, and this one's that sort of subtle black. And notice how it's a little bit more faded, a little bit more muted. It still has that same presence in the hierarchy, but it's a little bit easier to read. It fits a little bit easier within the design as well. So that's typically why we go for a treatment like that. Okay, customer support rep. So that's using that purple color, right? Look at our mockup again. That's sort of nice purple. So we can go ahead and grab that from our logo, I think. So again, sort of spidey senses are tingling. We're using this in 2 different places, but I think for right now, we're gonna be okay. So we'll say that card, and we'll say, I think it's our H3 in there. So we'll say the color is equal to that purple color. And I think the font weight is probably too heavy for this as well. So we'll say font weight, and spell that right. There we go. Let's say like 300. Give that a refresh. There we go. That's looking a lot closer. And also we need to make this smaller as well. So we'll say font size, let's say 18 pixels, right? And maybe even smaller than that. What if we say 16? Okay, good. So I think that's getting us there. And again, we're gonna have to tweak the margin here. So margin top. What if we set this to like 2 pixels here? Make that a lot smaller. Okay, perfect. And I think this has gotten us a lot closer to what our design is, right? So if we go back to the design, yeah, this is looking pretty good. I think we're gonna need to tweak these. The font weights seem a little off maybe, but we can tweak those up and they're going to be pretty nice. And then we can probably add a little bit more spacing there as well. So now we go out to our section anchor tags. We'll say maybe a little bit of margin top. And maybe we'll say 2 pixels again, just to add that little bit of spacing. And I think our font weight looks like a little bold. Actually, it might be because this is not supposed to be bold. What if we put that to normal? So we'll say font weight normal. There we go. I think that kind of balances it back out. So again, your font weight or font styling dramatic impacts on your visual hierarchy and what you're presenting. And this is looking pretty good, right? This is our mobile design more or less and what we've been trying to accomplish. So any questions so far on how we set this up and how we built this? Everyone able to follow along? Anything you want me to repeat? Any questions?
I just have a question about font weight. I think in design we have regular, light, bold. Can you use those instead of normal? Like I'm not familiar with 300 or 400.
Yeah. So when you were, at least when I pulled this from Google Fonts, what you get are these values here. So for instance, you can see them right here on the link, 300, 400, and 700. And when you actually go to like Google Fonts, if I open this up here, so we'll do fonts. I think I've got Lato in here. Yeah. Wait, if you look in Google Fonts here and you go into the customized section, you can see it says light over here, and then it gives you the numeric value for that font style. So light 300, regular 400, bold 700. That's where those numbers are coming from. It's just a more precise way to specify it, so that way you're really like, okay, I want this one font weight in particular here. So that's where those numbers are coming from. I don't know if regular will work. So because font weight is something we work with so often, what CSS has done for us, it's given us some properties that map to like the default buckets of font weights. So light, for instance, if there's a light font family there, it will try and give us a light version of that font. If there's a normal one in between, probably somewhere to like 300 to 400, it's going to give us that regular one, or even 500. And then if you say bold, it's trying to look for that, like the heaviest version of the font. So it doesn't necessarily specify to the most to a specific number. It's more like a range and whatever's available for you. So that's why you can get away with using that. Does that kind of clarify a little bit more?
Yeah, I think so. The reason I'm asking, because when we handed over our Build Week project to developers, I didn't write like a number. I just said regular, bold, light, and I assumed they knew what that was. So I just want to make sure that going forward, I give them a number, or like, how do I give it to them so they know exactly what to do with it?
Yeah, so you want to give them the number as often as possible, because that's more exact, and it's like easier for them just to like, okay, there it is, and kind of probably in this similar format, right? Say light is 300, regular is 400, or bold is 700.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, great question. Alrighty here. So we're kind of, went to the wrong one. Too many tabs here. So we've got our final, we've got our mobile here looking pretty good. But now if we go back to desktop, it's not exactly what we're looking for anymore, right? We've got to add some media queries here to make sure it's working at those larger sizes. So let me go ahead and let's do that kind of quick, not quickly, but we'll get that going for us here at the end here. So we've got our card, and what we're going to want to do is add a media query here. So we'll say add media. Again, we're using that 768, right? So mid width 768 pixels, and we got our curly brackets, right? And so now inside of here, we target our card. And now we're just going to add the properties we want to change. So the first thing we're going to want to do is change the flex direction, right? We want it to go to a column instead of the row by default. So we'll say flex direction. We'll say column, right? And that's what's going to change this from being small over here. Make this a little bit larger, right? It's flipping this too from the side over here to something that's a little bit more stacked on top of each other here. So that's kind of our first big tweak we're going to be making. And the second one we're going to have to make is the width here, right? It's kind of 100% or almost or auto right now because of we don't have it specified. So we want to be a little bit more exact with our width here. So they start wrapping next to each other. So now we can say width is equal to, maybe say like 300 pixels here. I think that'll be a little bit easier to put everything next to each other. Okay, great. So we've got width. Maybe we want to make this smaller even. We'll say like 275. And again, if you don't give your developers something specific, they're going to take their best guess. And that is where you can see some confusion sometimes between your content and your intentions and what's going on in the design. Okay, so this is closer. I think we want to center align this content a little better. So we'll say maybe justify content center. Oop. Is that going to work? Oh, I need to do a line item, sorry, because we switched our flex environment here. That's tricky. That'll catch anybody. Line items, center like that. There we go. So that's getting us a little bit closer to kind of that stacked view. And right now we don't have our grid working exactly the way we want to, right? We kind of have this stacking of our elements because we switched from inline block to flex, and flex doesn't behave the exact same way. So what are we going to do here? What can we do to change this? I'm going to go into my index .html here. I see this main section, and it kind of has all of the cards inside of it. So maybe I can use flex and main to organize them slightly differently, right? Stack them next to each other, and maybe use flex wrap as well. Did you all see flex wrap yet? Did you look at that property there? Okay, great. So I think that's going to be a really good candidate for this. So we'll come over here. We'll go to probably right above here, right above our section, and we'll say main, and we'll do display flex. And actually, you know what? Now that I'm thinking about this, maybe we want to do this after our media query here, because by default, it's actually looking pretty good, but we want to do this inside of our media query. And so in this case, I'm going to put it inside of this one because it's kind of related to the changes that we're making over here, right? So we'll say display flex, and then we'll say flex wrap, and we'll say wrap, like this. Alrighty, so now if I give this a refresh, we're starting to get this wrapping functionality that we might expect, right? All these are wrapping next to each other. And it's not quite perfect. We need to make some tweaks here and kind of grow if this blank area is missing or empty. But we're going to do that tomorrow when we learn more about our responsive units. So we made a lot of progress today, right? We've kind of got this roughly in the spot we needed to, and we're flipping between our mobile experience and our desktop experience now. So we're really starting to embrace our responsive design, and that's pretty exciting. So any questions on responsive design or anything we've covered today? Alrighty then, so let's go look at our assignment and then we'll wrap up for today. So today, responsive CSS, we'll go down to the project here. So again, there's sort of a code-pen walkthrough. And this stretch goal is actually going to be like the same stretch goal throughout the week. So there are 2 mobile and desktop mockups, and we're going to kind of be recreating them in your own code-pen there. So again, start with the mobile one and then work up to that desktop one. And the breakpoint should be at 1,000 pixels, and you can find any of the assets you need in here. So here's the house and the profile image, and you should be good to go from there. So any questions on that assignment? The CodePen's got the instructions inside of it. Y'all, I think, are familiar with that format now. And the stretch goal is really to push you. So I think the assignment itself might be a little bit on the lighter side than usual, but that stretch goal is pretty heavy. So go ahead, go for it. Push yourself to attempt it. And I'm excited to see what y'all turn up with. All righty. Any questions, thoughts? Alrighty then. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your TLs or to me. Christian will be back tomorrow. So and then I will be back on Friday actually for the Q&A. So I look forward to seeing you all then after a full week of exciting work and focusing on responsive design and then getting into CSS frameworks a little bit more. So good luck with your assignment today, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Hey, Kyla, could you stop the recording now?